Welcome to episode 2 of Boosted Rolls. I'm Tomasz and I play Circle.
I'm Simon and I play Legion. After the first episode we did, we had a bit of feedback. We had people asking to hear more about list chicken, matchup choices, and to go a little bit in depth into that. So we're going to sort of go from there and see how it goes. So Tomasz, what are we talking about in this episode?
So in the first part, we are going to talk about how to build a strong pair aimed at winning a tournament. We are going to talk about versatile versus skewed lists, about specific counters, and the theme diversity. I mean, how important it really is.
Yeah, and then in the second part, we're going to look at once you've built your pairing and you're ready to go, how do you approach the list selection? So talk about a little bit about list chicken, how and why it comes up, and whether it's a good thing or not. Spoiler, I don't think it is. And then we look at sort of if you're taking a look at your opponent's list and you haven't seen it before, or maybe it's a little unfamiliar to you, how to analyze their win condition. So trying to figure out what they are looking to do, and that can obviously help you with your list choice. And then we're looking at some tips and tricks on what to look for outside of the list selection. So, for example, scenario, terrain, tournament fatigue, and opponent's perception of you and your perception of them, and sort of how that affects the choice. And then we're going to go a little bit more in depth on choosing whether to go first or to go second and choose the side if you win the roll. And then what have we got in section 3?
Yeah, in part 3, we are going to put all the theory together and discuss in depth why we always end up playing Kruger to Bones of Ouroboros into Anamak Primal Terrors. Yeah.
Yeah. We always end up playing the same thing, and there's obviously a reason for that. And it's a very close matchup. It's we both agree. We've played it quite a few times, and we think it's pretty 50-50. So it's a good one to discuss and maybe to get a little bit more deeply into. So that's what. All right, cool. So why don't we start with a strong pairing? So maybe, you're the more creative of us. So tell me, how did you come up with your pairing? Because I believe you came up with it yourself, right?
Yeah, I did. And the backstory of the pairing is that I was playing Una 2 and Baldur 2. One was in Call of the Wild and the second one was in Bones of Ouroboros. And I felt like Una in Call of the Wild was the only strong option in Circle outside of Bones of Ouroboros.
Is that not still true? To me, that seems true.
It's hard to tell if it's true or not, but this is the way I feel about it.
Well, at least it's the general opinion right now. Yeah. And it seems to be true, yeah.
Yeah, so going back to the story, I was playing Una 2 and Baldur 2, and both of those lists were skew lists. One was a dev skew, and the second was an arm skew. And what they did, they asked my opponent a very different question, but they've also put me in a list chicken situation often. Also, later on in the meta, some things showed up that could both hit accurately and crack armor efficiently. So I didn't like that, and I didn't like the list chicken situation this pair often put me in. This was the time when Waltz left Christmas CAD, and I've started for the first time seriously considering double bones. Before I always assumed it's bad, but I never put in the time to think about it or test it. So I finally decided to put in the time. I started dojoing some lists, and the more I was thinking about it, the more sense it made. When you are in a situation when one of your lists have magical weapons and the other does not, if you are facing Grix, which requires you to have magical weapons, they are in control of the list selection process because they know they can easily predict what you are going to choose, right? So in Bones, everything has magical weapons, right? In Bones, everything is going to have similar stat line. In Bones, both of your lists are going to have sentry stones. So there are many similarities, but you bring different caster with a different fit, with a different toolbox, and you can complement it with different solos and units from outside of your faction, mercenary or minions. I call it the fundamental approach, because you try to make both of your lists have the same fundamentals, while filling them separately with the tools that other doesn't have.
Right, so you're sort of spreading your tech choices out a little bit between the two lists, yeah.
So this is the approach. I think it's right for Circle, but I'm not sure if other factions are the same way. How do you feel about it?
Well, first of all, I've just got a couple of questions regarding Circle, and then we can come on to Legion, and obviously that'll open up, maybe some discussion of other factions. But first of all, you said that you started off with Una 2 and then Baldur 2 in Bones, and yet when you decided to switch to double Bones, you dropped Baldur. Why was that?
That's probably because Baldur is for starters, very vulnerable to things like Wraithbane.
Anything with Blessed.
Correct. And also, I felt like Kruger 2 is really strong in bones. So I basically built Kruger 2 list, and then I started thinking what's going to be good to pair with Kruger. And Baldur 2, while you bring very similar stat lines and it would be a good pair, it wouldn't be probably good into Grimkins. I would need to build Kruger very specifically for Grimkins, and I didn't want to do that because it takes away a lot of his strengths when you build Kruger. That's like kind of versatile caster to answer specific faction.
Right. Yeah. When you sort of build your Kruger into a counter list.
Yeah, I wanted to avoid building counters. I wanted to build like 2 generalist lists. I would say that both lists can play into most of the meta, and then you just pick the one that feels stronger into certain matchup.
Yeah.
And this is the situation ideally where you are in control of the list selection process, where you know what your opponent is going to pick into you, but you can tweak your choice.
Yeah, okay. My approach is a bit different to yours. Maybe a little bit because of the state of where Legion is at the moment. So my previous pairing was Abby 2 with Lilith 3, and then Abby 2 with Vale 2, with Double Thrones, and stuff like that. So I basically had this sort of strong center of Abby 2. And this has always been my approach, is to have a sort of a main list and an off list, which basically isn't what you just described. In fact, it's almost the opposite of what you just described. So we obviously have very different approaches. I always have a main list, one which I feel is the strongest thing that my faction can offer. So I look at what we have and I put out the strongest element that we can. So when I started playing the game, I felt like the strongest thing we could put out was a very high threat range, huge alpha, beast brick with mat fixers and stuff like that. And then I had an off list, and the job of the off list was simply to scare away or to beat anything which I felt threatened my main list. So when you're looking at Abby 2, obvious problems are guns. She doesn't have a lot of ways to deal with guns. And originally I was running Abby 2 with double Blight Wasps, so even light guns were a threat. And honestly, Legion heavies don't really have the armor to deal with light guns anyway. So it's guns were a problem. And so Lilith 3 seemed like an obvious place to start with that. And Lilith 3 had the advantage of being a serious assassination threat. So people who were considering dropping sort of backline weak casters that can be assassinated had to really think, yeah, but I really cannot drop that. You know, I had so many opponents say, yeah, I couldn't play this because if you play Lilith 3, I'm just dead.
Yeah.
And that allowed me to free up my Abby 2 a lot more and get more favorable matchups with Abby. However, with the release of Primal Terrors, that became hands down the strongest thing that's available in Legion. You know, I think there's very little question that that is the case. And within Primal Terrors, you've got a few options. I'd say your top the top tier options are Callous One and Animag. I think they both run our strongest versions of Primal Terrors. Callous One and Animag both have a different style and approach to that matchup. Callous One is more sort of in your face, and Animag can afford to stay back a little bit more and try and set up for a good alpha with her feet. Either way, though, what you end up with is one very strong Primal Terrors list. And Primal Terrors is a little limited in what you can do with it. So it's always going to have double Hellmouth. It's almost certainly always going to have a unit of Chosen. Probably 2, depending on your caster. I don't have 2 Chosen, but many lists do. Then you're very likely to have 1 unit of Warmongers because the character attachment you get for free in most lists is very good value, and he provides a mini feat that makes that unit of Warmongers particularly good, and that takes advantage of Vengeance from the team. So a lot of that list builds itself. You're going to have a Blightbringer, generally, because he was improved so much in the CID. He just fits so well with Primal Terrors. Yeah, so the list kind of built itself a little bit. And therefore, unlike your Kruger 2 and Bradigus pairing, I think most people have shied away from, have avoided double Primal Terrors, because I don't think we have quite the diversity necessary to do that, to sort of have this balanced pair that you spoke about. I actually think that we might end up there in the future because our other themes are so bad at the moment that I think actually I'm certainly considering a double Primal Terrors after the WTC.
Yeah, I was considering it. Like, why people don't use it, and
I think they might. Time will tell. So we've got this strong list of Primal Terrors, and then the question becomes the second list. So if we're trying to do it your way, I think we'd probably end up with double Primal Terrors with a slightly different focus. Maybe you'd have the Callus one and the Anamag.
Yeah, I was thinking about Callus 1 and Anamag, but the thing is that I forgot to say that Kruger 2 basically is so versatile that even if I have a bad matchup, and you are probably not going to get 100% good matchups into the whole meta.
Unless you're Crix.
There's probably some weak spots. But what Kruger allows you is to go for assassination if things go bad. So I think that if you pair double Primal Terrors together, it would be really good in case one of your list have a strong out for an assassination.
Yeah, and I think like Callus definitely doesn't have that. So Callus 1, he's very much in your face, sort of a predictable style and very good sort of scenario caster. And I think several players have discussed that he should probably be in your pairing somewhere because of what he brings to the table. But Anamag does have some assassination potential with Gallows.
Yeah,
but it's not super strong. It's good. It's there, but it's certainly not Kruger levels. But it's there. It's there. I think there are some other versions that have that a bit more. Like there's a Callus 2 list I'm playing around with that has some assassination potential. I don't know. As you say, it's nice to have an out.
How about Twins or Ryas in Primal Terrors?
Twins or Ryas? Twins are in a bit of a bad place at the moment, mainly because Amok. So Amok is a very sort of auto-include Primal Terrors solo who's a Warlock attachment, and Twins cannot take attachments because they are sort of attached to each other. And so you lose Rise from the army, you lose the blocking of Incorporeal, and that means that you can't use that list into Crix or Grimkin, particularly. And I think that Crix and Grimkin is where you'd want to play Twins because of Banishing Ward and stuff like that. Like their tools are kind of suited to Crix and Grimkin, and yet the counter to Crix and Grimkin isn't there in the list.
But Anamag is a counter to Crix and Grimkin, right?
Anamag is a counter to Grimkin, not so much Crix.
Oh, all right.
Anamag is really good into Grimkin, but Abby 2 is still probably our strongest option into Grimkin, but I think she's it's tricky to put her in a pairing right now. There are too many things that cause her problems, so I think Anamag is probably the safest option. Anamag is the safest option into everything, really. I mean, this is the way that I build my pairing. So to try and sort of round this off, because I think I've started blathering too much, is that what I do is instead of having what you have, which is two lists of a similar but different tech structure, I have one list which I've built to be as versatile as possible. So I don't skew the list. I don't have like double chosen, double this, double that. I have one Golab, one chosen, one Warmongers, Amok for support, 3 spell martyrs because I think it's better to have more solos depending on so I can play on any scenario, and things like that. And so I have this very versatile Anamag list, which I'm intending to drop 80% of the time.
Yeah.
And then my second list is Callus 1 Ravens of War, which is a very skewed list. It does one thing, it does it very well, and it is a dude spam list. So it's got, I think I run about 30 Gargoyles, 15 Striders, and 1 Hellmouth, a couple of Angelii, a solo Gudrun for scoring flags, a couple of Spell Martyrs again for scoring flags or for projecting threats and so on. And the whole point is everything runs up into your face, then everything runs up into your face again and feats. And it's very difficult to clear that many models because when the feat is active and you kill something, it becomes an incubus which has defense 16 for that turn. So you end up with, you need a very high volume of attacks to deal with it, and you need to be able to deal with high defense, or you need to be able to kill Callus, which again during his feat is difficult because he's got high defense. So I use that list because it counters a lot of the things which cause Animag trouble. So I looked at Animag. I looked at, okay, what do I struggle with? This, and this. Okay, which list can I build that deals with that? And one of my problems was Haley 3, for example. Callus 1, I have very good results into Haley 3 with. Signar in general. My general plan is to dodge Signar because they just have gun lines and all sorts of Siege 1 guns and armor piercing and just stuff that Animag can't deal with. And so my general approach is to dodge. But if I can't, then Callus gives me this option to play a heavy scenario clock game.
Yeah.
So as you discussed, it gives me an out. Yeah, it gives me an out. I mean, I never use the term sweeper and pivot because I never played Pokemon, which is where I believe they came from. And I know that a lot of people get upset about using different terms from different games and so on. So I just sort of talk about it in terms of I have a strong, versatile list and I have a complementary list. It deals with Ret, it deals with Signar, it deals with some Kador stuff, not the Armored Corps, but it does deal with, it used to deal with Rocketeer stuff. And that's what I do, and that's how I build my pairing. And the advantage of that, and I think we can maybe start to approach the list chicken topic now, more detailed, and I'll come back to your side and your approach to list. The advantage of my style is that I almost never end up with list chicken, because I'm going to drop Animag most of the time, and I will only drop Callus if I know that is the favoured matchup against their pairing. So I don't end up with this situation where I've got one list that's good against one and one list that's good against the other. If Callus isn't good into both of their lists, then generally I'm going to drop Animag because she's so strong, so versatile. I have game into almost everything. And so I don't end up with list chicken. I can sometimes end up with a slightly unfavoured matchup, but I won't end up with this sort of either I win or you win, depending on which matchup we end up with.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say now, the reason that I think that's important is because the goal, at least for me, and I'm almost certain for you, is to win a tournament. And to do that, you need to be undefeated. And to do that, you can't rely on coin flips. So if you end up with coin flip scenarios where it's simply, if he picks this one, I win, or if he picks that one, I have a massive advantage, that's very bad for the player that considers themselves better. So if I think I'm the better player, I don't want to enter a coin flip scenario with a worse player, or even an evenly matched player, because I think I have a better chance to win if we go into a more balanced game.
Right.
And in order to win 5-6 rounds, you can't take coin flips because you're not going to win 6 coin flips in a row. You're just not. So at least that's how I think about it. So maybe now, what do you think about list chicken? I've talked long enough.
So yeah, before we go into list chicken, I wanted to say that we already discussed that we are both playing the factions that are not really diverse in terms of theme forces. I mean, Circle has like 5 theme forces, but really there are only 2.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say that we need to have some diversity when we need to find them inside 1 or 2 theme forces usually. And I would say that most people would like to find them inside 1 theme force if one theme force is generally stronger than the others.
I mean, Grimkin are a good example of that, right? Because they basically just play Dark Menagerie most of the time, and rightly so, because it's really, really strong.
Yeah, and this is because as a limited faction, they need to answer many things. So inside Dark Menagerie, you have a lot of armor, you have like Arcane Vortex, so protections from spells, you have Shield Guards, so protection from shooting, you have RFP on the War Beast because they collect corpses, and now you have wall locks that bring other tools. So you have every time the same fundamentals, like I discussed in my Bones pairing, but with Caster, you bring different tools that complement each other. And I think this is the same approach with Bones, where we basically have one theme force that's stronger than the others. So you have almost the same tools with your battle group and with the tools you bring like with Sentry Stones and Shifting Stones, and then you just diverse the list with the casters to have as wide toolbox as possible to play into the meta, which is now kind of diverse.
Yeah. I mean, to quickly touch on versatile versus skewed again, Gatsby 3 Slayers is a list that's come up a hell of a lot. And obviously it's a very skewed list. And yet people clearly view it as being very strong. Many people have brought it. What's your view on that list specifically?
I mean, I don't think the list is overpowered specifically. I mean, if it's only the one list, if there's no second list, I think that players wouldn't take 9 Slayers with them. And probably there are some people that think that this list is too strong. But I think the real advantage is that you can take two different lists that asks different question, and because the power level of both is so high because it's Krix, and it's so versatile because
It's
9
Krix.
Slayers, yeah, it's Krix. You have inside Gatsby 3, you have like assassination, you have protection from guns. It's just versatile. So what it brings to the table, it allows you to pair well. It asks your opponent so difficult question that they might just lose the game in list selection. It's hard to avoid a list chicken situation on your opponent's side because of your, obviously Krix can be in the list chicken as well, but because of the power level of their list and their diversity and the tools they bring, I think they put opponent in this bad spot. So
Yeah,
it's
favors
popular
them.
because of the pairing process, not because of this list itself. I
Yeah,
think.
that's exactly. I'm exactly with you, and this is the reason why I asked about that list specifically, is because it hits this topic that we're on, which is that it's a skewed list, but it serves a function of benefiting any pairing that it's in. Because if the list itself is strong, it's brainless. It's obviously a good player will still play it better, no question at all.
Yeah.
But it's pretty clear what it's designed to do, and it does it far too well for the points that it costs to put on the table. And it's got all the usual Krix levels of bullshit. But the real benefit, as exactly as you said, is the fact that whatever their second list is gets inherently stronger, because whatever the opponent needs to drop needs to be able to answer Gatsby 3, as well as being able to answer the other list, which is often, for example, Scouter 1 or Denny 1 Tactics or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's very, very hard to answer both. And as you say, when your general power level is above that of every other faction, as is the case in Krix, it becomes so much stronger to have a versatile versus skewed list. And I think that's a little bit of what makes Animag suited to this style of having a really strong list and then a more skewed list, is that Animag is actually one of the few lists which they've sort of bumped up to a power level anything close to what Krix offers. And so, therefore, we've got this sort of high power level list, and that makes our skewed list, at least in my opinion, more powerful, because having a power list and a skew list is good. I think in Circle, where you don't have one list that just says, haha, you must answer me, it's much better to have a more balanced pairing. All right, let's move away from pairings. We've spent a long time on it. So, we've got our pairings. In my case, Animag and Callus. In your case, Kruger and Redigus. What is your thought process when you go into list selection? How do you begin to choose between Kruger and Redigus?
So basically, I analyze my opponent's list, and the first thing I usually do is to think how the game is going to go when I choose my first list and my second list against his first list and then against his second. Like, I have picture memory, so I'm just trying to look at the table, see the terrain, see the scenario, think about what my opponent is going to do with his list, what is his game plan, and then I try to imagine how the table is going to look if I win the roll, or if I lose the roll, or if I win the roll, what do I choose? If I choose going first, or if I'm going to choose the side. So...
But I guess you do, I mean, you probably choose that first and second stuff later, right? The first thing to decide is which list you're going to drop. Or you really go into you really think about first and second even before you choose a list?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, I don't think I do.
It's probably the reason why sometimes it takes me so long to choose what I drop, and often in a tournament I'm discussing with my opponent things, and in the background I try to think how the game is going to look, just to have a general plan before I choose the list. And I think it's maybe it's a circle thing, because the terrain on the table is really important for me. I have abilities like Prowl that triggers terrain, and I don't produce so much terrain. I don't do like cloud walls or anything like that.
Right, you can't trigger Prowl yourself.
Yeah, there are some things that can trigger Prowl. I can put forests with Walled Wardens or with Sentry Stones, but usually the terrain on the table is more important. So during the selection process, I think the more experienced you are, the less you need to do it. Sometimes you know those, you see the casters of your opponent, the pair, and you already know what the list is going to look like. Maybe you already played into both lists, and you just need to focus on the
All
table.
right, but that mean. Yeah, I mean, it's true that like if you played a lot and if they're playing a meta list and you know it, then that's fine. I think experience is the best answer. If you've experienced the matchup, you know what's the best thing to drop. You drop it.
Yeah.
But let's say you don't know. Let's say you don't know, and you look at some lists that you don't know so well. How do you go about analyzing your opponent's list? What are you looking at when you look at their list? Do you just open up War Room, look at their caster, look at their feat, and then start deciding, or do you really go into detail, look at each solo, or how do you approach looking at an opponent's?
When you don't have the experience in the matchup, you rely on your imagination, and usually I go through the list. And what I like about War Machine and about the community is that people, especially the high-level players, don't want to try to catch you on any gotchas and stuff like this. They want the better player to win the game. They want the better tactical decisions to be more important than any other factors. And
That's been my experience.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat. So usually, if I don't know my opponent's list and I don't know what they do, what I would do usually is I would ask. And sometimes there are players that will tell you, here are my cards, read them. And then I just need to go through the cards and I'm going to read through those cards. But the better you are, it might leave your opponent in a disadvantage because you will do the same thing to him. If he asks you what your list is doing, you just pass him your War Room. So
yeah.
I've maybe been in this situation once. Usually people are just very open about what their models do, what can they do, what they cannot do. Sometimes they go into details about abilities. And I've heard some people that didn't want to ask me the question because they didn't want to give me the tip that they don't know my list and they don't know what to expect. But I think it's better to just tell your opponent, I've never played into your list and what does it do, and just try to focus on what your opponent is trying to tell you and try to think why he brought those tools and what's the synergy there and what he can do. Try to think about it. It helps me to think about it like I would have those tools, what I would do with them. It's easier than to imagine what he can do with those tools. And if you have some ideas, like you hear the keyword that worries you, you can just ask your opponent, hey, so if you have this and this, can you do this? And your opponent will usually tell you, yeah, that's exactly why this is here and this is here, or no, I cannot because there are some restrictions in the list. So
yeah, I think it is much better to go in with specific questions. So if you just say, hey, what does your list do? I think there are a lot of players who will tell you, look, it's a strong list, lots of armor, lots of boxes. I've got Hellmouths, they're going to pull you in. I can combine that with Gallows to sort of, do a lot of movement stuff. And I've just got incredibly high power. Like, that's an answer. That's a very brief answer. But if someone says specifically, oh, hey, so you've got Gallows, so what is the threat range against Hellmouths? What is this? Like, how can I be safe against Hellmouths? It's like, okay, well, that's a much more specific question, and that's something that I can give you a better answer to. So, for example, an answer to that question might be, well, normally you can defend against Hellmouths with trigonometry because you can put two models base to base with each other facing the Hellmouth, and then it can't drag either of them. But essentially, Gallows changes that situation because it allows me to pull one of them out to the side, and then I can drag both of them in.
Yeah.
So I think, and if an opponent asked me in that way, I would definitely describe it to them. And I think that I think more people are more likely to give you more information if you ask things specifically. Exactly as you said, like look through the cards, look for some synergies, look for things that you're scared of. So look for assassination stuff, especially like, okay, so hey, you've got this spell, you've got this overrun. So what's the full threat range on that nasty heavy? With everything. And please explain to me how that threat range exists. And then they have to go through and say, well, I've got Shifting Stones, I've got Hunter's Mark, I've got Telekinesis, I can use that twice. Specific questions bring better answers.
Yeah, that's true. And also, Privateer Press design of models really helps because there are some things that are unique for each faction, like let's say Choir for Menoth, or Sentry Stone, or Shifting Stone, or Hellmouth for Legion, and stuff like this. So when you know those basic unique things, you know what the faction can do on the table, and other things like unit like warmongers or farms, just heavy infantry, or there are many things that are very similar and they are meant to do certain thing. Like some things are meant to crack armor, some things are there to block things, to not be pushed. There are some general concepts about what the model should do, and if you know the general concept of the model that your opponent is going to bring or have in the list, you don't need to go into details of every single ability and think how it's going to affect the game, because you have the general overview of what that model or that unit is there for. So it's better to go through like support solos, like let's say Mist Speaker or Gallows Groves for me, and like your the Runebearer, right? Or how
Amok.
Yeah, Amok. Yeah, so solos like that, because they usually bring some tools very important for the list, and obviously your opponent's spell list and fit, and then try to imagine what's the game plan of your opponent's list and how he's going to leverage his spell list on the table. So if you see Gallows, you already know that he's going to probably leverage that. And if you stay outside of his threat ranges, he will probably try to pull something inside of them. So if you see TK, you instantly know that the assassination potential is high. So there are just things like generally to look for, and that will be more important. And there are things that are less important, like going into specifics of each unit. And then if you really want to, you can ask your opponent. It should help.
Yeah, so I mean, there are 3 official win conditions: clock, assassination, and scenario. And really, there are not that many lists which specifically target clock. I think Convergence Foundry Spam is maybe one of them.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a clock list. Maylock Posse Spam, probably another bit of a clock list.
Testament.
And yeah. And also Callous One Ravens of War. That's kind of a clock list, or can be. So I think that you can focus mainly, mainly you can focus on looking at, is this an assassination list or is it a scenario list? The unofficial win condition is attrition. So if you kill all of your opponent's stuff, then you can basically choose any win condition you like. So you can look at a list and say, is it for scenario? Like, is it, do they have a control feat? That's something I always look for. So does my opponent have a control feat? If they do, then it's going to be likely to be a scenario game. And if it is, then which scenario are we playing on? Is it live or is it dead? It's roughly half and half at the moment in the current packet. You know, Invasion, the Fighter's Belt, whatever it's called, Breakdown. I forgot what it's called. What's the circle and two rectangle ones?
The Pit 2.
The Pit, there you go. The Pit and Invasion, they're both really dead. And Mirage and Spread the Net are really live. And the other one's somewhere in between. So if that's another thing you can look at. If it's a really live scenario and your opponent has a scenario list, pretty likely that they're going to want to drop it. So that's worth looking out for.
Yeah, but I think it's not worth asking your opponent this question. I mean,
well, that's not a question to ask. That's just something to look for. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're never going to tell you that. I mean, and if they do, they're more likely to lie. And that's fair. I mean, that they shouldn't tell you what they're going to drop.
I would not tell my opponent what is my win condition. It's because I wouldn't tell them that I'm going for assassination and never try it. I would never tell them that this is scenario list, but I will do assassination. I would just feel bad that I told him that I'm aiming for something and I'm going for something else. So in this situation, I will just tell that I don't know. There are 3 win conditions or 2 or whatever in this game, and I'm going for one of them. And
I'm just going for any of them.
My opponent, they would usually tell the same thing, because now you are kind of committed, because if you go for different win condition, you lied.
Yeah, you kind of lied to your opponent. No. This wasn't as part of my sort of which questions to ask your opponent. This was part of my how do I analyze an opponent's list. Right. What I like to do is sort of say, are they trying to win on scenario or are they trying to kill me? Either my caster or my whole army. And so if I identify an assassination list, I'm much more likely to drop Animag, because Callous has to be kind of central to do his feat thing, and he is susceptible to dying. Whereas Animag is generally on the kill box line, behind a Blightbringer, very safe. So if I think they've got an assassination list, I'm more likely to drop Animag. If I think they've got a scenario list, I'm more starting to think, well, again, Animag's great because I've got 2 Hellmouths sitting in the zones, and it turns out they're really good at contesting. But if
so
I think
this is the great spot to move to another section, which
Sure.
is our possible outs and tips and tricks. Because as you said, Callus needs to be central. So if your opponent is going to bring assassination list, you're probably not going to take Callus. But if there is a giant house in the middle of the table with a corner that you can hide Callus behind, it's probably very likely that you are going to choose Callus because you can keep him safe the entire game and no one is going to see him or move through the house. And if it's the house big enough so even incorporeal models cannot move through it without a charge bonus, that's like the best scenario you can be in. So
yeah, I mean, like, so yeah. So now we're moving on to sort of looking at terrain and stuff. Yeah, I think that if, like, for example, with the Animag list, you're looking at where are my Hellmouths going to be? Are there some nice sweet spots where I can put them in behind forests, buildings, clouds, or is it just a big parking lot where everything's open? Because if everything's open, then Callus starts to look a lot more attractive to me.
Yeah, sure. So the terrain will affect. I mean, the terrain is going to affect my choice of the list, and it's different for different lists. Like, let's say Kriegs usually don't care about terrain, so if there's a lot of terrain, they usually can play on this table, and if there's no terrain, they probably can play. It depends on specific
yeah, list. I mean, Kriegs are a bad example because their power level is just stupid. And their variety is stupid. It's just all stupid. So they're a bad example.
Yeah, and if you have like assassination caster and the table is like there's no terrain to protect the caster for your opponent, or maybe only one side is like this, you might choose your assassination caster. Let's say you're in a disadvantage on list selection process. Both of your lists are in disadvantage. So you are now thinking about your possible outs in this game. So let's say you look at the table and it's hard to win on scenario. You know you are not going to win on attrition. So you think, how I'm going to assassinate. And then you see a half of the table being open and half of the table having all the terrain that can protect, that's protective or caster. So now let's say you have a list that has +1 to go. So you want to win the roll. You want to take the side with a lot of terrain. So not because you want this terrain, it's because you don't want to give it to your opponent. And
to deny them.
Opponent needs to play suboptimally because he needs to protect his caster, and that usually means that you need to camp more and you cannot allocate that much focus on, you cannot run your beasts hot as you would like to, or you need to keep some of the bases in front of the caster to block line of sight. And scenarios like this will happen. So then, because your opponent needs to play suboptimally, you even out the matchup, because now you took out some of his working points that would be doing the work on the table to protect the caster, and now you're playing like 75 points to 60 points. It's just an idea. So now you're even out the matchup. You have chance to win the game on attrition, and if your opponent is going to remove all the things that are keeping his caster safe, you can go for an assassination. So that's another thing to think when choosing your list and looking at factors outside of the list itself and the matchup.
Yeah. Just a quick note, because I put it in my personal notes and I forgot about it when we were speaking about it. But when you're analyzing an opponent's list, look out for ranged knockdown and ranged stationary.
Oh yeah.
If anyone's
Especially if it's AoE.
If they've got a knockdown or stationary from ranged, you know what's coming, and if you get killed by it, it's your own fault. I sometimes even ask, do you have any way to knock me down from range, or make me stationary from range, or reduce my defense from range? Because I think that's a big thing, especially in shooty lists. Keep an eye out for it. Regarding possible outs, I like that idea, and I like the idea of turtles. No one has an advantage against turtles. They're just broken as hell. They're probably the most broken model in the game. So it is very surprising that they're not Kriegs, but they are there and they are nuts. And the only thing that ever gives them any disadvantage is terrain. So if there is like 2 big buildings on one side, you know that's going to cause them all sorts of problems. And it becomes very, very good to choose to go second and to basically put them where all these buildings are in their way.
Yeah.
Especially if they're playing Xerxes 2 and they've got 3 huge bases to contend with. I've won games where I shouldn't have because my opponent got all cramped up around a building that he was trying to get around. And yeah, okay, his turtles are ridiculously fast and they can move around and do what they want. But all of his support pieces were trying to get to them, his pain bearers to whip them and to rile them up and heal them. And he couldn't get his Kreia and his Agonizer into the right positions because he had just too much terrain in the way. So I think your idea of terrain is great.
When we discussed Scorn in previous episode, Johan was describing our game, Rush It into Bradigus. And yeah, and this is exactly the scenario you told, not with the buildings, but there was a giant acid pool that he couldn't just put his beast handlers inside because they would die.
So yeah, acid pools are great. Great example.
Yeah. So this is the example when the terrain made the matchup even out the matchup, or maybe gave me even an advantage. And this is the thing you want to look for before you roll the dice or before you make a decision, because many players will just roll the dice. They know their list is designed to go first, and they will say, I'm going first, without even thinking how it's going to affect their game. And this is why I try to imagine the first turn before I even roll, because there might be some things that you don't see without proper depth of thinking about it, and without using your imagination. And then you are going to deploy your army, you will do your first turn, you'll look at the table and say, oh fuck, I'm screwed. You don't want to be there.
No, you really don't. And I think a couple of ways that you end up in the oh fuck, I'm screwed situation is if you... I know a lot of people don't choose to go second. I'm in a weird spot because Hellmouths actually benefit from going second a bit more than most things. So I choose to go second maybe more often than most people. But even I choose to go first in a number of situations, which is especially control feats or really fast lists. So if you know that if they go first, they're going to run up halfway up the table or further, Halberdier lists from Retribution, Slayer spam, Scaro 1, where all this stuff's just going to run up so far and project threat basically up to your deployment zone, then you're not going to get much of an advantage from your positional advantage because you can't move.
Yeah.
Whereas if they've got a really slow list, you can let them go first. And I especially, because I've got Hellmouths, and I just say, look, you can go first because frankly, you can't move up that far anyway, because if you do, you're going to move up into my Hellmouths and I'm going to eat you. So I have a slightly different decision to make. All right, last thing we had written down here was tournament fatigue. Was there something you wanted to say about fatigue?
Yeah, so I wanted to touch a bit on going first and second, just quickly. In a Steam Storm, I was playing the Dreamer, and my opponent chose to go second, and it was spread the net, and it was very surprising for me. And I played the Dreamer matchup a lot, and I win probably all my games up to this point. And this is the point, it was Patrick, and this is the point when I changed my mind. Because when you think about it, Dreamer list want to play a long game. She's there in the middle of the table, defending herself, keeping her brick, and she wants you to come to her, try to mess up her brick, and then she's going to kill something, create a phantasm, and put it somewhere in the board to contest. So now you're in kind of a disadvantage because you need to be with everything in one place with your whole army, and your Gorehounds that are going to flank are probably going to die in some point of the game. So if you go second and you score some points first, so now you are in a safe spot that you are probably not going to be outscored quickly. And the longer the game takes, your opponent, you both lose models, but you create new models with phantasms every turn. So this this gives you an advantage because the longer the game, the better it is for you. And if you score first and you score last with ability to create models, like let's say Mirage scoring last, you might end up just putting a single phantasm on each of the flag, and now you might be losing the game on scenario, but now you can play, like, you can put your caster whatever because it's your last turn, it's 7th, your opponent is not going to assassinate you. You can do whatever you want on the table and score as many elements on the table as you want to. So
yeah, we're sort of saying that in a list where your game plan is to go to round 7, going second becomes much stronger.
Yeah, I think it might be true for slow bricks in general, but I'm not convinced. It's true for the Dreamer and it's true for Baldur too. I'm not sure how it is for any other slow bricks. but I wanted to touch on that. And tournament fatigue that's kind of obvious. Like if you're really tired, if you have hard time concentrating, and you have like fragile caster, or you have a caster that's really hard to play because there are many angles, many things you can do, you might be better off not choosing it, just because you can play very poorly because of tournament fatigue. So it might be better to choose something that's easier to play and rely that your opponent is as fatigued as you and is going to make his mistakes first.
Yeah, we have a local player who plays Signar, and he actually originally put Sloan in his pairing on this basis, that he knew that he had a bit of a weakness with clock, and his other list was one of the Haleys, and doing all the complicated clock stuff and long games, grindy games, and so he put Sloan in originally as a way to give himself a break. So it's just it's a very simple list with a very one-dimensional approach, and yeah, there are some tricky assassinations that you need to think about, but you spend 10 minutes thinking about it, and then you do it, and then you go and have a beer for 40 minutes. You can go and have a rest. Yeah. You can let your brain relax, and I don't want to go on about the Swedish Masters again, but when we played it, I played a lot of long games, and I must admit that I really would have enjoyed a break. So like my Callus is a bit more of a break for me, because it's sort of run everything up again and feet. And yeah, okay, I have to think a lot about the positioning, and there's a lot of stuff there, but it's not as turn 7 grindy as Animag. So from a fatigue perspective, that's another potential reason for me to pick Callus. Yeah. All right, so we've covered fatigue, we've covered matchups, we've covered terrain, and last thing then is the choosing first or choosing side, I guess. We've kind of covered that. Is there anything else you want to say on that? Or
nope, I think we covered that.
Covered it. The only thing I have written down about choosing first or choosing side is looking at if your opponent has +1 to starting roll.
Yeah, that's true. If you see it, you probably want to go first just because his list might be designed to go first, right?
Precisely. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. If they've got +1, it's probably because they want to go first. There are not many lists that take +1 in order to go second. It's pretty rare. So even if your list might not mind, like you're thinking, maybe I want to go first, maybe I go second. If they've got +1 and you somehow manage to win the starting roll, pretty much always you want to go first, just to deny it from them. And the last thing, and something that we've spoken about recently, and we'll probably speak about again, is counter deployment. So generally speaking, deployment, like most people don't counter deploy that much. They sort of have a deployment that they like with their list. They get sort of into a rhythm, and that increases your speed, and it helps with your clock, is that you know your list, you know where you want to deploy, you look at the terrain and you go, right, okay, I want these guys on this side, these guys on that side. However, there are some situations, and we'll come on to it when we talk about Kruger versus Animag, where counter deployment can be a good thing. So again, if you're really not sure about first or second, and there are elements of your list which need to be either on the same side as or on the other side from an opponent's piece, then it might be an advantage to go second, because you get to see where they deploy first. So a couple of concrete examples, because that was a little bit theoretical. If your opponent has a Colossal, and you know that you need to have your counter to it on the same side, or you know that the Colossal is the only thing that can crack armor in that list, so you can put your armor on the other side of the table and be safe, then it might be good to go second, because, for example, let's take me. I have the Chosen Cavalry. You need to have serious armor cracking to kill them. When I'm playing against the Grim 1 list with 4 huge bases, the Sea King is their only armor cracking. So if I end up going second against that list, I can watch where he puts his Sea King, and I can put my Chosen away from it. Or if I know that they have something that can kill my Hellmouths, I can deploy my Hellmouths in a specific way to hide from that piece. Against Kruger, we speak about the battle engine, because it's one of the best ways of clearing Hellmouths, and so I want to deploy against them. So again, if you don't know whether to go first or second, if you genuinely think that it's 50-50, then have a look at, is there anything that you need to counter deploy? I mean, it's maybe getting a little bit perfectionist at this point, but
no, it's very important, and it's a very good point. It's like sometimes you put a prey on something, and you see your opponent running it to the side of the table. He loses basically a turn that he would do the work or move forward just to run away.
Yeah.
So if you can do it in deployment with everything in your army, you can see where your opponent, I mean, if it's like very symmetrical list, it's hard to avoid it. But if it's like many different things, like let's say a list with one colossal, one cavalry, one infantry unit, then it's very, very, very important to do it if you're second and to think about your deployment.
Well, I think you had a really, really good point, which was about symmetrical lists. I think a lot of lists are symmetrical, and what I just said doesn't apply. If someone has a symmetrical list, 2 cavalry, 2 something else, 2 something else, 2 something, and they just have half and half, and then the caster in the middle, really, you can't really counter deploy that. Or you can a little bit with Serene and so on, but if they have a 1 battle engine, 1 colossal, 1 cavalry, 1 infantry, then counter deploying becomes really good, and we will cover that.
There's usually a price you pay for being symmetrical. I mean, for example, I had not sure if you're familiar with my Una 2 list, but the first Masters I won was with this list. It was 7 Scarsfeld's Griffins, 2 Goraxes, and 2 Purebloods. Many people were like, it's not really optimal because instead of putting a Gorax and a Pureblood, I can have a lot more birds. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of true, but with this list, you want to go first, you have +1 to starting roll, and you don't want to put your Pureblood on the wrong side of the table. And they usually don't want to be in a backline, like the War Beast with a huge spray. You want it to be a bit in front. So it was only for the reason not to do a mistake in deployment.
Yeah. I mean, you also make yourself a little more unpredictable, right? Because if your setup is asymmetrical, and so you've got one thing on one side and then one thing on the other side, and all your supports on one side and all your values on the other, like your game plan becomes very obvious before anyone even moved anything. And sometimes you just say, yep, that's my game plan. I don't care if you know about it. That's what I'm going to do, and it's very strong. And sometimes it's better to hide it a little bit and to have a more symmetrical deployment and then move around. Yeah. All right, cool. So I think this episode has probably got to a length where we're happy with, and we can probably look to end it here and then maybe go into the Kruger versus Animag in another episode.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to suggest.
Yeah, so I mean, it was. I think we've covered a lot of stuff, and we can maybe go, Kruger versus Animag in another episode, and maybe include any feedback questions that we get into that episode.
Yeah. So if you have any suggestions, if you want us to explain something that we said in this episode in more depth, just let us know. Leave a feedback. You can do it in comment section of this video if you're watching it on YouTube, or you can do it through Facebook. You can find us easily.
Or I think we're both on the Reddit Discord, right? I mean, I'm primarily in the Legion section, but yeah, you can get in touch there, or wherever you want, and we'll happily take the comments on board. So that's it. Cool. Anything you want to say before we finish?
No.
Excellent. Well, me neither. So thanks for listening, guys. Hope you enjoyed.
Bye.